Now let's go ahead and fix this issue that we have here where we're setting the user ID manually. And obviously this is not the way it should be. So we have to get the user ID when we log in and pass that user ID to our add item form. How do we do that? Well, let's first change back our entry point here. I'm going to go ahead and comment this one out and uncomment the original one here. That way, what this is going to do is when we run this app, we are going to go into our login right away. Okay, so I'm going to save this and give it a run. You should see our login. There we go. So I'm going to say p2shown password. I should be able to log in. There we go. It's logged in and I'm here. Let me go ahead and set add stuff. So if I were to add things, nothing's going to happen here because we're not getting anything anyway. So the idea is to get our ID, user ID, in this case is going to be PaoloDeShone, me, right? Let's go to our users here, right? It's me, and I want to get my ID, okay? And pass it to my enter task. All right. So what we need to do for that to work is the following. So we know that once you're logged in, we go to our add item here. Let's go to our login controller. So this is where all happens. So it says here, show add item screen. We need to fetch our user ID. Once we logged in, we're going to go get that user ID. So we are able to then put in a variable and pass it on to our next screen. You remember correctly here where we say user next, user row next, which just tells us that there is indeed a match in our database of the user. And here we're able to actually get our first name. Well, if we're able to get our first name, in this case here, first name row, that means we can also get the user ID, right? So what are we going to do? Because I want that user ID to be accessible anywhere in our class, I'm going to create a private here. Say private. It's going to be int. I'm going to call this user ID. Okay. So what I'm going to do inside, I'm going to just say user ID as such. Okay. Say user ID. There we go. I'm going to say is equal to user row dot get int. Right, and the column name is going to be user ID. Has to be exactly as it says here. Okay, so now our user ID is set. Next, what are we going to do? We're going to go down to where we are showing the add item screen. Okay, and before we even go and start showing this add item screen here, what we're going to do, we're going to have to pass that user ID to our controller, and this controller will pass that into add item controller so that we can use it there. And so I'm going to say add item controller, say item controller or add item controller is equal to loader dot get controller. So I'm getting this add item controller because that's exactly where I'm going. And then what I'm going to do, then I'm just going to say add item controller. I'm going to set user ID to something. And I'm going to pass user ID. Now, we haven't created this user ID yet. Let me say user ID as such. Double click. So that means I need to create something, a user ID method inside of our add item controller. Okay, so here, I'm going to come down here and say public void user ID as such. Let's take this outside. Here. And I'm going to pass here int user ID. And at the top here, I'm going to create another. I'm going to say private int user ID. And let's say this dot user ID is equal to user ID, just like that. Okay, so I'm setting the class's user ID to this. Okay, let's get rid of that braces there. Okay, go back here. Set user ID is now set. Now, to see if this is actually working, let's go ahead and say s out. Let's say user ID is, I'm gonna pass this .user ID to see if that's gonna be set. Let's save this and give it a run. I'm gonna log in as, let me delete, stop all and start over. All right, I'm gonna say jbond, keep going, and you can see it should say user ID is 2 in our console here. Let's see if that's true. Let's see if that is indeed true. And user ID is 2. Yes. All right. Now if we log in as someone else like Paulo, I think feed is shown, and I say log in, and you should see here user ID is 1. Great, so we were able to pass our user ID into the add item controller here, which is good because that's what we need in order for us to be able to use that ID, this user ID here, to then save it in our task table. Now while I'm here, just to simplify things, I'm gonna say public void get user ID as such, and this is gonna take, this has to be int, we'll return an integer, which is our user ID. And what this is going to do, I'm gonna say return these user ID. Okay, it will just return our user ID. So the next thing we need to do is we need to invoke our add item form controller and get that controller and do the same what we did to get the set user ID and of course the get user ID. Okay. Now I notice here this controller here, I made a mistake because I have a lowercase a. This is not good. Let's go ahead and refactor that. It has to be add item controller as such because we're talking about a class and all classes have to start with an uppercase letter. Okay, that's just technicalities here. It would have worked, but just making sure that everything is consistent. All right, so what do we need to do here now is we need to create a root or a loader because only a loader allows us to get the actual controller, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say fxml loader. I'm going to create an object, new fxml loader as such, and then I'm going to say loader that set location. I'm going to pass essentially this get class and then that get resource. I'm going to pass exactly the same that we passed here. Okay, like that. Okay, this will allow us, because now we know this loader here is indeed giving us the location to where our add item form is, which is indeed connected to our add item form controller. All right, once I've done that, next thing I can do, I can just go ahead and invoke this add item controller. Say item controller or add item controller as such. Use that loader class and I'm say get controller. Okay, now I have this controller here, which means I can do things to it. I can pass things to that controller. Before we do that, let's go to our add item controller here. And what I'm going to do, let's create at the top here, I'm going to say private int user ID, just like what we did before. And you know what? Let me create a getter and setter here, command N, the beauty of development for that user ID. And there we go. I'm going to just move them. Okay, that's awkward to have them at the top there. I'm going to move them to the bottom there. There we go. So now we have the setter here. When we set, I'm going to s out just to make sure that we're actually passing the right one. User ID as such, so we will be able to see that we are passing the ID indeed. Okay, so now I have getter and setters, which means I can go back now to our login here and in fact, to our add item, like I said, and use our add item object controller here. I'm going to say dot set user ID, and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go ahead and pass our that user ID, or I can just use this get user ID. Probably better that way. That way we are completely like that. Okay, so we're passing the user ID onto our add item controller, which is this one. No, this has to be add item form controller. You probably saw this. Okay, this has to be this one, add item form controller, not just add item controller. All right, so now if we save this, let's give it a run. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so I'm gonna say jbond, add a password, click. Right, we still have the user ID is 2, and we have some issues. And so the easier way to do this, because we know we want to set the user ID inside of our add item form controller. So what we can do here easily, we can just go ahead and instantiate this add item form controller here. Okay, object, new add item form controller, and then we can just say add item form controller dot set user ID, and we just pass the get user ID, right, which is this get user ID that we have here. Okay, that's another way of doing this. Okay, and we don't need this at all. All right, now if we go ahead and run this, we should see, let's see, like that. Let's see, we go to task. The moment we click here, we can see added clicked, and we have our one, which is the user ID. So we were able to transport the user ID from the first screen to indeed the last one. All right, this is good. So now that means we can actually take that ID, user ID, and pass into our task database. Okay, which means now takes us. All right, so let's go to our add item form controller here. So for testing, we're just adding manually all of this, the description and the task. Now we can actually get the information from our text views, okay, and pass in our ID, user ID, which we can get from our getter here, get user ID, and pass to our database. All right, so simply what we can do here, let me go ahead and say string. This is going to be, let's see, task. Let's say my task test is equal to task field that get text. I'm going to call trim, and then string task description that get text, and trim as well. Okay. I'm going to say if task test text is equal to not equal to empty, or task description is not also empty object, okay, then we are going to do what we need to do, else we will do something. So now what are we going to do? I'm going to copy this, put it here. Okay, now we're going to set timestamp is still the same, and description is going to be task description, and the actual task is going to be our task text. And that's it. And then we just call the database handler, and the insert task method, we're going to pass our task object here, and we are done. Okay, for now, I'm going to say s out. If something goes wrong, nothing added. So let's go ahead and say task added successfully. Okay. And of course, forgot, I have to add the task. We did all this work to get the ID when we didn't even use it. All right. Now I'm going to say task that's set ID. Let's go ahead and go back to our task class here. And we're going to say private int user ID as such. Go ahead and create a getter and setter for that one only. There we go. These need to be at the bottom, of course. All right, so we just created getters and setters there. Nothing to worry about. Now we can go ahead and say task.set user ID. Look at that, and then we can pass it to get user ID. Where does this get user ID come from? Remember, we created this setters and getter here, so we are getting the user ID. Okay, which we'll set from here. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and run. Now this should work as intended, meaning that we can add, we're going to be able to add tasks here, right? Dynamically, so we don't have to hard code everything. Let's go to our tasks. We have it already opened. Let's go to ask it like this. So we have at least 3. Now let's see what's going to happen. Of course, I'm going to log in as let's log in as Paulo. Maybe that's going to be great. So P is shown. I'm going to log in, and there we go. User ID is 1, and it's true because if you go to our users, you notice Paulo, my user ID. Go to users, such Paulo user ID is 1. All right, go back to tasks here. All right, so moment of truth. So say add, let's add a task. I hope this works today. That's not a task, but that works. Description is hooray. Let's save it. Task added. Let's see if it's true. Refresh, and there you go, folks. There you go. Yes, 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 yes. It's working. You see, there is the ID being passed in. Okay. Task ID is 4, but user ID is still 1. It seems like Paulo, I've been the only one adding items there. It's okay. And the date is there. So today is the August 31st, 2017 and 12:28 p.m. where I am, and hooray, I hope this works, and it's wonderful. Now, to prove to you that this is indeed working, I'm going to go ahead and log in as James Bond. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this and run again. We should see the ID, because I'm going to log in as a James Bond, we should see the user ID changing here as we add a task. So I'm going to say JB or Bond, all right? And let's go ahead and there we go. Okay, add a task, save the world, and description, I am Bond, and I will save the world today. All right, let's save this again. If all goes well, we should see another task added. But the cool thing is that the user ID is now going to be 2, not 1, because we are relating, the user ID, remember, is relating our task with the person who is added that task. Okay, so naturally we should have a 2 here. Let's save. If we refresh, something is not right. Well, let's see. Let's say that user ID. I think that should be appropriate because we are setting or getting this user ID which we're setting. Okay, let's save this. Ooh. All right, let's try again. Let's try again, folks, because I know the user ID are being transferred correctly. So this should work. I think this time this will work. All right, I'm not going to edit this part out because I want you to understand that things happen. We make mistakes as we develop things, and we just have to figure out how to solve them. And let's hope that this solves it, okay? All right, so let's say JBond. This time we should hopefully have the 6th one, but this time it's going to have 2 because that relates to James Bond. All right, so it's going to be, there we go. Okay, move here. Let's add 1. Okay, see, I see there's 2 here. User ID is 2, so this should work. All right, so this is going to be save the world. I will save the world from itself. Save. All right, moment of truth. Drum, brr, 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 let's say. Why is this user ID just constantly give me 1? Did I forget something? Ah. I think we, all right. So I think, let's go to our database handler here. There we go. Folks, here's the problem. Here's the problem. Well, turns out here, the problem is that I just have to, I'm passing 1 constantly when we are preparing our statement. That's why I'm just, this is why this is happening. It's because, well, we set it to always pass 1, which is not what we intended. We intended for this to happen when we were testing out this functionality of adding items or tasks to our task table, right? But now that we have everything set up, we should just go ahead and say task dot get user ID like such. Now this should work indeed. All right? Okay, let's try once again, folks. I apologize. Please forgive me. I'm only human. I am only human. All right, JBond. All right. This needs to work, folks. This has to work. I know it will work because we're getting the exact IDs here. So that was the problem. Let's go ahead. Last attempt to save the world. Let me save the world. All right. Ah. What is the problem now? All right, cannot add or update a child row. Foreign key constraint fails. To do task constraint user ID. All right, let's simplify this code here a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a static. I'm going to say public static int ID at the top here. In fact, let's call this user ID. And get rid of this because we won't be using that. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to create some sort of a global variable because that's probably going to be the easiest as opposed to what we were trying to do here. So instead of having to instantiate the controller, I can just go ahead here and get that variable. I'm going to say add item controller. So we are inside here in this class here. I'm going to say dot user ID. And I'm just going to go ahead and set get user ID just like this. Okay. So everything else is the same. So I'm just getting this get user ID. And now I'm going to save this. Let's go. So go to my add controller here, add form controller. What I'm going to do, I'm going to say s out first. I'm going to say user ID. I'm just going to say add item controller dot user ID. So I'm just accessing this static variable that we created there. And I'm going to say task here. That's set user ID. I'm just going to go ahead and pass our add controller dot user ID as such. Okay, so this will simplify everything. So now we are directly getting from our previous controller the add item controller, and we accessing the user ID. Okay, because we're setting here inside to get user ID, which we are setting inside of our login, right? right here. When we pass, we're just setting the user set ID and passing it in. Okay. Now, with any luck, we will be able to get the correct IDs and also hopefully be able to add the task, because now we'll actually have the ID. Okay, let's go ahead and give it a run. Okay, let's do PD shown. Let's log in. Okay, no task. I'm gonna add a new task. Paulo clean car. Car needs to be cleaned today. Okay, let's see. Save, and there we go. So user ID is 1 because it's me, Paulo. And let's see if this is true, if this was actually added. Let's go ahead and refresh, and there we go. So now we are adding here 1 for user ID because I am Paulo, so that's me, first one, right? If you go to users again here, see, the user ID is 1 for Paulo, right? And then the date, and of course the description and the task. All right, very, very, very nice. Okay, so we got it to work, and what saved us, which actually allowed us to not have to do a lot of work, is creating a global variable inside of our add item controller at the top here, right? Made it static user, and then inside of our add button right here where we are actually getting ready to show our add item form, we set the ID, the user ID, to the get user ID, which is this method here that was set in our login controller. Okay, inside of our show add item screen, we set it here to the ID that we're getting from the database. So anytime, let's try with a different user. Let's say jbond, give it a username like that. And if we add James here and say description and say enter, and you'll see we should have indeed a new task added in description. Let's go ahead and refresh, and there we go. ID is 2, and he was added as such. All right. Perfect. Now you see that numbers have jumped from 6 to 28. That's because when we were having those errors, things were actually being added and the IDs were changed. So that doesn't matter. Okay, so just know that this is now working, and as many tasks as you add from different users, this should work perfectly. All right, so we're making good progress here, and I'll see you in the next video.